Welcome to the second section of this module for your grant writing training focused on using data to tell a story in your grant application. In this section, we'll be talking about using community stories, using the stories that come from the individuals and the groups that you serve within your grant applications. While in the last section, we were focused on the types of data that we might gather, how it is that we might determine what type of story or what type of data we should use, thinking about our grant makers guidelines. This time, we're using a more traditional definition of a story. What is it that we're talking to our grant makers about? What are the stories that we're gathering from out and about that highlight our success, the impact that we're creating for those that we serve? Now, if you think about your organization and the types of stories that you might want to highlight, my money is on the fact that you are already sharing some of those stories somewhere else outside of grants. Maybe you're sharing some of them within your grant applications, but it is usually the case in organizations that the great stories of the impact you are creating are shared in all sorts of other nooks and crannies consistently. In everywhere from your annual report, to your social media, to your website, to your individual appeal letters, your bequest information, your major donor proposals are often overflowing with different examples of the great stories that are coming out of the impact that you're creating, the work that you're doing. So before you get too stressed, what I encourage you to do is to look around the organization and look for where stories are already being shared. If you don't already have access to that information, to where it's stored, to where you can see what stories you have permission to use, this is your first bit of homework. Make sure that the information and the stories being shared for use throughout the organization are also visible and available to you as the grant writer, the grant professional, so that you can use them in future grant applications. Now, of the types of stories that you might then be gathering, let's look at the different types. The first is thinking about a client story. This is one of the types of stories that we might try to use within a grant application. What might that sound like? Well, it likely sounds like a story from an individual that has received service from you, or an individual that has participated in a project or program. Or maybe it is a broader group within a community. But what is the common denominator for these types of stories? They are telling from a personal perspective, from firsthand experience, what was the impact that your organization had on their life, had on their community. That personal impact, that direct participation and impact is the purpose of this story. So it's not as if your grant maker gets to talk to the person or the people or the group, but these stories help to shine a little bit of light into what that experience might have been. When you're looking in your materials, here's an example. You might be out and about on your website, clicking through to see what is some of the information shared by the rest of the development team or by your communications team, and you might find that there are some great stories from those you have served on your website. That's a very common place where we'll find stories because your website is designed to reach a wide range of audiences, and so it might be a spot that would appeal to corporate contribution staff. It might be a spot where individual or major donors are going to see your website and get engaged. It certainly could work for a grant maker. Well, when we think about these different stories and what we find on our website, how could we use them? Well, we certainly could take stories like that and insert them within our application itself. Now, in this example, it doesn't have the spacing and formatting available to us that you might have seen on that website example, but with the indentation and the spacing available, it stands out as something a little bit different to the grant maker. But what if formatting isn't going to allow for you to do that? Or what if, my goodness, Space doesn't allow for you to share the whole story. Maybe the story that's on your website is much longer, and what you're going to have space for in the response is just a small snippet. Well, the fact that it's out on your website gives you an advantage. It gives you the opportunity to share maybe the key highlight, the key piece of information, but to then offer the opportunity to the grant maker to go read the rest of the story if they're interested in learning more of the details. Will a grant maker always click out or take the time to type into their own browser the address where the rest of the story can be found? Of course not. But we've provided the option, and it's helpful to know that the grant maker could go look and read the rest of the story if they want. What we're going to be confident in, though, is that what we have shared, what we have made space for within our application, is the most important and the most relevant portion of the story, so that it does stand on its own, even if the grant maker doesn't click out to the broader, more complete story. So if our client story is one type of community story that we might share, another type is about donor stories. So these are stories where individuals who have supported your organization are sharing why do they support your organization? Why do they believe in your work? What have they seen as a result of their support? This can be helpful in situations where one grant maker is influenced by the due diligence and the support of another peer organization. Donor stories might be helpful for you to consider if there is not a single client story available for you. That might be one reason we look at this type of story. The other might be that when you were doing your work, looking at the guidelines, looking at the types of stories that the grant makers were sharing, you might have encountered some stories of their own where they're sharing what they have learned, what peers they have collaborated with, how they network across the funding organizations. That might be another clue that using some form of donor story might be important to the grant maker. Yet a third type of story that you might consider, it's a staff story. What, from the perspective of the staff, those that have the expertise to be delivering the projects and programs that help you meet your mission and vision, that help you serve your community, what are the stories that they have that could be shared? What have they seen take place? Now, perhaps you're choosing to use a staff story because while you're aware of some client stories, you do not have permission to share those stories. And you're not going to take that story and even anonymize it for the protection of the identity of the individual. No, you don't have permission to use the story at all, and so you might choose to instead ask a staff member to talk about their perspective, their experience. Maybe they're generalizing a bit in their story if they don't have permission to use any of the specifics, and so they're talking about what are the changes that they see, what is the impact that they see created as a result of the work. This is also an interesting opportunity where staff can talk about their why. Why do they stay involved in this work? Why are they passionate about your mission and vision? You can share the staff stories from those two different perspectives. What are they seeing for the change that's created? And also, what is their why? What is it that gets them excited and passionate about coming to work each day and helping those that you serve? And lastly, we have the true community stories, the stories that come from the broader community that you're interacting with. It could be from collaborative partners. It could be from those who have also, not from a staff perspective, but from a community organization perspective, have seen the impact of the work that you've done, have seen that final success, the ultimate solutions, and again, the impact, the return on investment that you're creating. When we think about community stories, this is probably the broadest of the categories because anyone that you're interacting with from other organizations, other stakeholders, could be the source of a powerful community story. These might be the least frequently used, but could have quite a bit of influence in terms of encouraging others to take action, to join in this journey together, to say, look at what we are creating together, come be a part of it with us. This can deliver some great inspiration and motivation to those around you. So depending on what you're reading about your grant maker, depending on their engagement within a specific community, seeing multiple other community key stakeholders and organizations speaking up, talking about the impact of your work, of your organization, could be exactly the story you need to get that grant maker to say yes. So here is one such example. This organization is focused on providing basic needs, services, and supports within a specific county in New York. And what they're talking about on their website is how it's the generosity of member churches, of individuals, of local businesses. It's all of those different groups that combine to create their success, the wonderful support and services that they're able to offer. Now that's basic text that they have on their website. But that messaging, thinking about linkages and the groups that they work with, and how without partners and supporters from all sorts of different organizations, they wouldn't be able to achieve their mission. It's quite frankly, it's pervasive throughout all of their materials, whether you're on social media or whether you're in their annual report. Again, on their website, as I showed you in the basic text, this is an example from their social media. They are talking about all sorts of linkages in this one example. A student writing an essay about community, getting a grant then for the organization from the Community Foundation. So now we've got schools working with funders on a funding program, and then having that successful story result in a matching grant from a local business. They are showing how deeply interwoven and connected they are with different organizations. And basically they're saying, wow, come be a part of the interesting relationships, the networks, the collaborations that we're part of. Come be a part of it. What you're proposing to your grant maker when you use a community story is you're saying, yes, come be a funding partner with us. Come be a part of our funding community, our community that's providing this wonderful project, program, support, service. Come be a part of it. You're welcoming them into being part of the story of your impact. Now, those were 4 different types of stories that we looked at. We looked at client, donor, staff, and community. You may use some combination of those 4 across your different applications, depending on what you have found by your sleuthing through your research about each and every grant maker. Will you always get to use a specific story? No. We might be relying on the data we talked about in the last section. But if you have any questions about the 4 types of stories that I suggested you might consider including in your grant applications, please don't forget to reach out and ask me via email, Diane@dhleonardconsulting.com. Well, I can't wait to continue our conversation about stories in your grant applications in the next section of this module.